I'm Jo Birch, and some of you, I recognise lots of people that I know, and that's very soothing. Thank you for having your camera on and being here. And a big thanks to Shirley for doing our slides today and our music. And Shirley's here. So I just want to pick up what Nicola said about breakouts. Take care of yourself. This is a dialogue session. So the EMC sessions are about dialogue. And that's what Andrew and I are going to do today. We're going to talk for a little bit, and then you're going to go into breakout rooms. Then we'll talk together. And then we'll repeat that. We're going to talk for a bit. You go into breakout rooms, and then we'll talk together. And so this is about you beginning the dialogue with yourself through listening and speaking with others. So when you get into the breakout room, you might be there with someone with vastly different opinions and thoughts and feelings to you. And so just to notice what's around about this topic. And as soon as we talk about something like suicide or indeed death, all our feelings of loss are invited into the room. So any feelings associated with loss might be here quite quickly. And so just to notice what is coming up for you, or indeed risk, which is, we're doing this within a wider context of risk. So simply notice yourself, really, is the short story on that. And we're just opening the edges of this, just a little bit. So just take care of yourself. And we thought of, let Andrew introduce himself in a minute, but just I'm going to draw your attention to this little slide where Andrew and I thought of some of the questions that we thought might be around in the room and that we've heard within our wide practices. And we're going to focus today on supervision as much as we can. We might be drawn into other areas, but that really makes me want to perhaps start somewhere, Andrew. So perhaps say a bit about yourself, and then where are you thinking we might start for 10 minutes before we go into the first breakouts?
Thanks, Jo. Morning, everybody, or hello, everybody. Really pleased to be here. This is my first dialogue session for EMCC, so I'm the newbie. But as you can tell by looking at me, I've been around a long time, and I'm a coach, accredited, senior accredited with the EMCC, and I'm also a BACP, which is British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, senior accredited counselling psychotherapist, which is not a snappy title. And I'm also a registered social worker, and I've been in practice for about 36 years. And I'm delighted to be here. Risk is a huge area in my work, which I'm not going to spend too long talking about, but suicide, talking about suicide and kind of actually experiencing people ending their life through suicide professionally has shaped my thinking about this throughout my career, which is why I'm motivated to do these sessions. So thanks for the invitation, Jo, for doing this with you. And to answer your question, which is where do we start? I was drawn to, I don't want to talk about it yet. No, sorry. That's not part of our work, is it? That's the one I wanted to start with, because that's the question that comes to me quite a bit, and particularly in the coaching frame and in the supervision frame. It's like, that's not part of our work, is it?
Yeah. Okay, that is a brilliant place to start, isn't it, Andrew? Because is it part of our work as supervisors, coaching supervisors? Suicide? Surely not. Let's explore that together.
Yeah. Did you want to start, Jo, or do you want me to jump in?
Well, I could say that in putting our workshops together, we've talked to a lot of people. We're doing some other workshops on this topic. And in my experience, we only have to touch the surface to know that in many, many people's lives, generally, their friends and family, work colleagues, people they know who know people, there is some connection with suicide. And for my own part, sometimes when even somebody that hits the media headlines, like in the UK when Caroline Flack died, I really noticed the impact on me. And I might want to take that to supervision. It might not be about me, but it's still about this topic.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to answer the question directly, that's not part of our work, is it? I would say yes, it is and can be. There may be part of us that wishes it wasn't, and there may be part of us that unconsciously sidesteps it because that's a more comfortable place to go to. Research certainly tells us that as practitioners and as supervisors, that's what we can do. We can unconsciously, sometimes consciously, not allow ourselves to hear the potential for suicide or the presence of suicide in our work, but actually, as supervisors supporting supervisees in their work, and indeed as supervisees going to our own supervisors, this is really important for us to talk about and for us to engage with, because as you say, Joe, it could be that the person that we're coaching or working with directly at times struggles with their suicidal feelings. You know, we often say, don't we had no idea that that's how they were feeling. Or it might be they're supporting somebody, or it might be that we're being touched by perhaps sometimes our own points of crisis. You know, we're human beings too, and any one of us can go to a point of crisis. So yeah, it is part of our work, and I think our task is about being able to hear it and being able to engage with it and being able to open the dialogue in a way that's facilitative and not scary and grounding and helps people begin to make sense of something.
And you said about how we might dodge it. Let's just pause there and just pick up that. How might we kind of consciously or non-consciously not hear? Can you think of like an example of how that might go?
I can. The literature calls it, the research calls it, if you want a fancy name for it, it calls it unacknowledged countertransference, which is a kind of a term from psychodynamic work. But what it's really talking about, if we're not working from a psychodynamic perspective, what it really means is that the aspects of ourself that is being impacted in the relationship that we're not kind of engaging with at a known level. And that can present in all sorts of different ways. So let me give you one or two very quick examples. We can have a sense that suicide is present but hasn't been named, and we can actively not ask about it, because if we don't know about it, it doesn't exist. We can actively move people on in a dialogue and distract them into other areas so we don't have to talk about it. These factors are driven by our own personal responses, which is why where you started, Joe, was really important. This isn't an intellectual process. This is a felt process. And we have to, as supervisors and as practitioners, we have to really allow ourselves to reflect on, well, what's my relationship to the topic of suicide? What's my relationship to my own experience of crisis, or that in my family or friends or in my colleagues or in the people I've worked with? Because this is often associated with fear. And another aspect of an acknowledged countertransference is that sense of being overwhelmed and frightened about getting it wrong. If I say something or do something and something catastrophic happens, then have I done something to kind of provoke that or kind of agitate a situation to make it worse? So it's better if I step back.
Yeah, I was thinking about that unacknowledged countertransference, and how I think of it is when this topic comes up, I know from the conversations I've had, some people say, I want to engage, but I don't really want to as well. I want to run away. And so those things that are out of our awareness, like I would call that in our non-conscious, because we don't want to talk about them, they're actually in the driving seat. So they're the driver of the bus and we are just passengers. But because we haven't talked about it, we're not kind of aware of that dynamic. And so once we start talking and we get the power, and we can then be more choiceful about how to address those things, like, how am I going to respond to this person? What am I going to say in the moment? Because there can't be a playbook. Every situation is going to be different. But once we're in our own driving seat around this topic, we can be a bit more choiceful and conscious about how we respond, or hopefully.
Absolutely, and we respond from a knowing position. You know, we can allow we can draw on the stats for a start, the statistics for a start to kind of answer the question. That's not part of our work, is it? And we can look at the international stats around suicide, and 800,000, 900,000 people dying globally through suicide every year. In the UK, suicide being the biggest killer of men in the UK. The suicide is present in our lives, and we can be powerfully frightened of it, and we can play all sorts of tricks with ourselves to kind of put it into the background. And I like your metaphor of the passengers on the bus. You know, the driver will be, in this instance, often the fear. What we have to do is be able to sit down and reflect on what's our relationship to this, and we then have to find our way of naming it. The most important training I've ever had on this was when I was 19 and I volunteered to be a Samaritans listener. And the Samaritans training, I'm sure there's people who might have done it, is outstanding, because what they do is take the fear away. And they basically say, you know, always feel okay to ask the question, to open the dialogue about suicide, to always be okay to name it first if it's not been named. And I have constantly been surprised throughout my practice as a therapist, as a coach, as a supervisor, as a social worker, that when I've taken that step to bring it into the room, how often it has already been in the room, but just not yet been named.
I think that would be a brilliant place to stop. But just to say, it's come when in those situations, as a supervisor, it comes into you, you notice it, and it's coming from somewhere. My guess is the person in front of you is already thinking about it. And if they're not, they're just going to say, no, this is definitely nothing to do with me. But if they are, you've kind of given a permission about, we can talk about this here. And then often that might leave another question about, having opened it, where on earth am I going to go then? And we might pick that up in our next dialogue piece. However, for now, let's go into breakout rooms. You'll be in threes. If you don't want to go in, just don't click to go in, but also put NBR in front of your name. And then EMCC will know not to put you into breakout rooms. However, otherwise, go in, meet some new people, and you're going to be in the breakout room for 12 minutes, and we'll see you back there. Just talk about anything that's coming up for you so far. Anything that you're noticing. Welcome back, everyone. As you come back, I hope you've met somebody that might be new to you, or perhaps an old friend, and you've been able to have some useful dialogue. But we would love some people to bring something into the big room, something you've noticed, a question, a thought, observation, anything you want to just let's start a bit of a group discussion. It won't really be a group discussion, but Helen, brilliant. We're going to start with you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this. I think it's one of the most important topics of our times. And I certainly notice that I'm a clinical psychologist trained for 25 years and recently got accredited to coach and mentor, and had to make very strong decisions with my supervisor about how to indicate what kind of work would get done with the client and how they present versus what I also am perceiving would be appropriate from my side, and how to make those decisions. In my group breakout room, I got the sense that perhaps with ICF and with EMCC and many other bodies regulating this topic, across the board globally, there isn't necessarily a systemic or a systematic rather, or regulated way to deal with it. Although I thought the way to deal with it was that under all coaching contracts, when these topics arise, very specific types of trauma and self-harm and or suicide, that it gets referred out, that the coach would decide that this is not part of the coaching space. It needs to be addressed clinically, and then it would be referred either to a GP or to a clinical psych or a psychiatrist. I'm not so sure if that's really happening or if that is the protocol. So maybe it would be good to get that defined a bit from you. And also, if it's not, what can be done about that? Is there the perception that coaching would still help? And then is the idea that the person would work with two different professionals at the same time? I don't know. I just need some clarity on that. And again, thank you very much.
You may or may not get clarity, but we'll certainly tell you what we think about this. And in the room, just to notice what you think, I think there were two things you brought up. One is the clarity on the contract of being a supervisor. You know, what is our contract with our people? And I'll go to Andrew in a moment. But the other thing was you talked about a discussion with your own supervisor about what you would and wouldn't bring. And I think that is also really key. So let's not lose that. And I can see you, Sylvia and Christina. But let's come to you, Andrew, because you nodded when Helen said, I'll get some clarity. Do you have some clarity?
Oh, no, I don't. I hope I'll offer something, at least, Helen. I picked up on the first thing you said, which I think is really important as supervisors or as supervisees. What we should be doing now is having the dialogue together about what it is we expect of each other. And I think the first thing you said was really critically important. You know, we often wait to have these dialogues until we're finding ourselves having to deal with a situation that's causing us anxiety or an immediate concern. And I think what's really important that as supervisors, we invite this discussion about what our supervisees think they should be doing. And indeed, we ask our own supervisors what they would be thinking we should be doing, because, of course, there is no single answer, because we can be coaching in many different contexts, and different contexts will demand different things. And the kind of expertise and experience of the supervisor will be important too. I think there's a question around the contract, which is something for exploration and supervision, which is what's the level of confidentiality that you're able to offer? The reality is that we can refer out to a mental health crisis team. I worked in a mental health crisis team for many years. We can refer out to those teams, or we can refer out to a GP or indeed a clinical psychologist. But the person might not necessarily be seen. They may not be available in different territories, in different countries, or if they are available, the waiting lists are so vast that they're not hitting the threshold for referral. So I think that's not a reason to not refer with the consent of the person we're working with, unless we feel they don't have the capacity to make that decision, in which case we're moving into the potential for statutory interventions, which happen but are rarer. But I think we need to remember that we are the resource at that moment with that person. And my experience is that having the dialogue about suicide can make an important contribution to reducing the level of risk. So for me, this is a personal opinion, I don't think referral out is always and immediately the best thing to do. I think the dialogue with the person is the best thing to do, to refer out, but to accept that actually the chances of them being kind of received, picked up and responded to is potentially at times going to be very limited. So we might continue to be the single most important source of support they have. I don't know if you agree with that, Joe, or think differently.
Oh, if I am a microcosm of this group, I have 1,000 thoughts in my mind and feelings. So if you all have, I notice there's some sharing in the chat. Do share things in the chat and really notice what an enormous topic this is and where we could go with it. But on these two, totally with you about now is the time to talk to your supervisor. We're all supervisees. So be able to have that conversation about if this does come up, where are our positions on this and how are we going to navigate this? But for me, the contract of supervisor, we don't have to let go of our contract of supervisor just to be able to have these discussions and be the person, as Andrew said, the person who's there supporting. We can stay in contract and in competence. These are the most important things about our work ethically, to stay in contract and to stay in competence. And so those are two of the influencing factors about what happens next and whether we refer out. But another thing is, so I'm in the UK. So the statutory services here have a responsibility in the law to pick up some situations. And so for me, that is where to refer. As Andrew said, even if they might not be picked up very well, still to refer out to those statutory organisations. And the other side for me is, rather than the practical, what do we do and when do we do it? When we train supervisors, we're often looking at developing reflective processes and reflective skills. And that is really important in the supervision relationship. And there is a time to hold the edges and be bold and dare to say, stop. Your client, your coachee, it might not be the supervisee, it might be the person one removed. I want us to stop here and ask some really specific questions about what is happening here. And let's get some factual information, and that will help us decide when and where and what to do. So we can guess here talking, but it is that factual information together with contract and competence that will come together, and probably other factors. But I'm going to pause there. And maybe we go to, I think Sylvia is next. Shall we go to Sylvia, Andrew? Yeah, Sylvia.
Definitely.
I wanted to ask a specific question, but I just want to quickly say, when you just said, Andrew, about having the dialogue, I completely agree with that. I think somebody choosing who feels suicidal, that particular person to declare that to, if the person on the receiving end of that has shown empathic understanding, which is what I think you were talking about, is it goes a long way. I really agree with that, to helping the person feel supported and reducing, perhaps the level of risk. So I appreciate you saying that. The question that I wanted to ask, which came up in the group, I think I've probably, because I'm very old, I've got a bit confused, is to do with the law. My understanding, and I wanted to check out, whether I've got this right or wrong, because it matters, obviously. My understanding is that up until the 60s in the UK, it was illegal to attempt suicide, and then it changed. But around the world now, my understanding is there are still countries where it is illegal to attempt suicide. But I think in the group, I used the word "it's a crime," which might not be the same thing as it being illegal. But then when I came away, because the group ended, I thought, I'm really confused now. So I wanted to ask Andrew and Joe to put me straight, because I'm a bit discombobulated about what I should know and what I'm knowing and how it might be completely wrong now. Does that make sense?
It does.
We'll go to Andrew first. Yeah.
I mean, you're right. I mean, what's really important as supervisors that we understand the legal frame in the country in which we're working, because it does vary. It is different, and you're right on that. In the UK, you're also right that suicide was decriminalised in the 1960s under the Suicide Act. So making an attempt on your life is no longer a criminal act in the UK. And indeed, there is no statutory obligation on coaches, supervisors, therapists to disclose concerns around suicide to another if they choose not to. And indeed, there are many organizations. I was clinical advisor to the Listening Place, which is a charity in London that offers listening to people who are suicidal, and they hold an absolute contract of confidentiality. They will never disclose concerns unless the person asks them to. And one of their biggest referrers is the National Health Service, interestingly, who hold a very different position. So we need to understand in where we're working what the legal context is. But we also, going back to what Joe said, there's a difference between the legal requirements that we need to include in our contract and our contractual requirements, which will be informed by how competent we feel to work, how confident we feel to work, our training. And so, there's no such thing as a single right way of working. If I feel very confident to have the dialogue, then I can use my supervision to enable me to do that. If I feel less confident, I can perhaps use supervision to build that confidence, but to then think about how else the person can be supported. But I'll shut up in 1 second and hand over to Joe. But just going back to your first point, we can all have a dialogue, and there is no such thing as a single way of being suicidal. Many of us, I too, can think of times in my life when I've had thoughts of suicide. I can think of points when I've struggled in my life. We can have thoughts of suicide but have no intention to act on them, all the way through to have an immediate intention to act, which I think is a different scenario that we would respond to differently. So whatever we do and however we work, never ever underestimate the value of being able to have a calm, clear, grounded conversation with somebody, whether that be our supervisee, our supervisor, or indeed the person that we're working with.
Oh, Andrew, there's so much that we could talk about, isn't there? I want to pick up something that's linked, Sylvia, and came up in the chat about what is referring out. And it links to our contract. And my favourite kind of thing at the moment is to say never, ever agree confidentiality. If you take one thing away, never agree total confidentiality. The total is important. Be really clear about what those limits are with anyone you work with. You can look at any person on this screen and you can think, oh, they look all right. I'll just say, yeah, you can tell me anything. And don't forget, people come in. Andrew talked about how people test us to see if we're ready to hear what's coming. And so somebody might say, I've got something to tell you. Will you keep this confidential? And come in really the back door when you're not paying attention and catch you off guard, that you might say, of course, like anything you say is confidential. Never, ever say it. Because people, ordinary people, this is us and our lives. Anyone can have anything in the background, and you really don't know when they are at one level deciding whether to live or die. And yet we are not one-dimensional as people. Those who know me, I have a disco ball, and there's always some in the shade. So I can be really laughing with you, having a joke, and in the shade, I can still be deciding whether I'm going to live or die. And so it's not that we're one-dimensional as people. So just to bear that in mind, your contracting with anyone you work with ever is really important, because the door, you may need to open the door to break confidentiality. And the question in the chat was, what do we mean by referring out? Do we mean something, I'm adding to the question, breaking confidentiality? And it might be that is what you do decide to do. And every situation is going to be different, but it might be that you say to your person, I'm really sorry, I'm going to ring this person for you. But in coaching, we don't generally have the details of people's GPs as we do in counselling. And so there opens another whole discussion. But let's go to Christina and make sure that we get Christina before the break. And I can see Ron and Svea as well, but we're going to go into another breakout about 20 past. And so if we can't get to you before then, we'll pick you up on the second round. So Christina.
Yes, thank you. Well, I was thinking now that there's two things that need to be addressed. One is, okay, referral, contractual obligations, legal obligations. But I think, and that's where I think EMCC could be very useful, is the guidelines where the conversation is actually happening. What to do when you're in session and the person says, I have thoughts that I don't want to wake up. Let's say it's not as clear as I want to kill myself. So guidelines about what to do there, because there's this myth of, wow, what if I ask the question? Will I give them ideas? The general guidelines about getting the facts, as Joe was saying, getting the facts of how serious is this? Is it just a thought I had? What if I jump on the train? As one of those intrusive thoughts. I think that's when you're in the situation. I think that's where the guidelines are, where the matters the most. Like, ask the question, assess, does it need referral? Is it just a passing thought? And that's where I think as coaches, the EMCC would be very useful to give us guidelines of how to deal with that situation, not the general contractual referral, but just the actual somebody, which by chance, it never happened to me, but 2 weeks ago, it happened. The coach said, well, maybe I won't get to be old because I'll jump out of a window. And said, what do I do with this? Do I ignore it? Do I ask the question, are you serious about jumping out of a window? So I think that's where the MCC courses or guidelines would be very, very useful, because it's happening more and more each day.
It's a brilliant question, because that's exactly what Andrew was talking about earlier, that somebody can say something and we can consciously or unconsciously decide not to go there. And so I'll go to Andrew in a moment. Just for me, we can have guidelines, but in the moment, what's going to equip us in the moment to respond? We're never going to get a chance to go, just stop a minute while I just check the EMCC guidelines. And I know it sounds flippant, but that is what will go through your mind. Like, what did it say in the guidelines? And it's what we're trying to open here is conversations so that when this does come up, you can take a breath and go, oh, okay, I am going to say, I want you to tell me more about that. For me, it's that moving from reflection to, I'm not going to let this pass. I am going to ask you. So I'm going to go to Andrew because he may or may not agree.
Oh, no, I do agree. I'll try and keep this quick, because I know we need to go to breakout rooms.
We've got 1 minute, Andrew. Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be that quick, but I might be 2 minutes. So firstly, as a coach, I always ask for my new coachees general practitioner information, or a contact person for another. I can't take my therapist hat off in doing that. I always ask. I explain to my coachees why I'm asking, regardless of the context, and I've never yet had anyone decline. So actually, I always do have that information. Second point I wanted to make is we know from research that actually people rarely come into therapy or coaching and say, I feel so bad, I want to end my life. They will almost always, at first reference point, allude to their thoughts. So they will say things like, sometimes I don't know if I can carry on with this. Sometimes I don't know if I want to be around anymore, or other such expressions. And at those points, I think it's really helpful to ask a question, to be able to say, you know, I wonder when you said, I don't know if I want to be around anymore, can I just check out? I wonder if you're telling me sometimes you have thoughts of ending your life. And if they don't, they'll say, oh, no, that's not what I meant at all. Sorry, what I meant was, If they do, they may choose to talk about it at that point, or they may choose not to. But what you've communicated is that this is all right to talk about, because the stigma around suicide continues to prevail, regardless of the discourses on social media around mental health. And then the reflections are really important. But my own research showed that very experienced practitioners tend to revert to predominantly reflective responses. Now, reflections are really important, but we also need to ask clear questions that aren't rooted in metaphor. And a very quick metaphor I'll give you, and then I promise, Joe, I'll shut up, is that we fear that asking about suicide and getting the answer yes is the really scary bit. It isn't. The metaphor I'll give you is horror films, and I do it because I love horror films. Apologies. But the best horror films are when you never see the threat. It's in the woods or in the shadows or in the attic or in the cellar or wherever, and you never see it, because then what you do in that space is project your own worst fears. The problem with modern day horror films and computer generated graphics is that directors can't help but bringing the threat in. And as soon as you see the threat, there's something about the terror that dispels, because you know what you're dealing with. And my experience with supervisees consistently over the years is that their anxiety has been when they've suspected but not asked the question. And in that space, they project their worst fear. Actually asking the question, and even if the answer is yes, I do feel like this sometimes, is less scary, because then you can have the discussions. I wonder how much you think of this. Have you ever had thoughts of what you might do? How immediately safe do you feel? Can you keep yourself safe? What support do you have at this point? Are there other supports that we could think of for you? And so on and so forth. That was much longer than 2 minutes. Sorry, Joe, I'll shut up.
I'm not the time police. So, but we're sharing the time responsibility. But let's just see what might be bubbling through for you. And we'll go into a small breakout room for 12 minutes again, and we'll come back and see what else we can talk about together. So just to pick up, did we cover Christine? I think we did before. And then Ron was in the queue. Ron, do you still have some thoughts? And let's pick that up if you do.
It wasn't really a question as much as it was a kind of a statement and an interesting realization I had when Andrew was referencing the fact that some of the services that we might refer to are incredibly overloaded and the wait times are quite long. I suddenly felt this incredible additional weight, a bit of responsibility that I didn't know what to do with. Because there's quite some level of, I don't want to say comfort, because it's never comfortable to be in a situation with somebody who's talking about ending their life, but to know that you can refer them and you can discuss with them where they can go. But suddenly now I'm sitting with the self-imposed additional accountability of knowing that referral may not be there when they need it. And I'm now the last person that they could potentially be talking to in reference to that statement they've made. And so it's not a question. I'm not looking for the answer. It was just simply a realization that, oh my God, what I was once really comfortable thinking there is a clean transition or a clean pass off. It's not clean at all. And it's possible that in the gray space, something might get lost and I would be the last person to have had any interaction.
Around the room, make a sort of sign if you think that resonates with you. Because it does with me, I can tell you that. Yeah. I think you've spoken, Ron, about something that is present for us. What if we reach out and there is no one there? Andrew, did you want to pick up something?
Yeah, I did. I think it's a really, really important point, Ron. And what I would say is that sometimes knowing how overloaded services are in all sorts of different countries, including the UK, can prevent us from making the referral, because we think that what's the point really, because they're not going to be seen. If I'm going to be really clear about this, and I'm going to sound rather clinical, and apologies for that because I don't come at this from a clinical kind of perspective, but there was a question in the chat around, our ethics and responsibility. What we do is we make a contract. If we believe that somebody is immediately at risk, as defined by our contract, with their consent, if at all possible, we make the referral on. Ideally, and in most situations, we make the referral on with their consent. But we make the referral. What we can't be responsible for is how the referring agencies that we refer to, whether that be a medical practitioner or a crisis team or a hospital team, we can't hold responsibility for what they do. What we are responsible for is what we do. And I've found this situation in my practice many times. I refer on. If I find myself in the terrible situation where somebody I'm working with has ended their life, in terms of defending and articulating my practice, I can show that I've done everything in my power to find the support for this person. That doesn't detract from the enormity of the impact that will have on me. But in terms of my professional role, I can demonstrate I've done what I can. Other people and other services have to demonstrate why they didn't take their referral on. And I hold on to that to ground me in that anxiety. It's an imperfect solution to the dilemma that you've raised. The danger is what I hear is practitioners, coaches, supervisors, therapists don't refer on because they fear the answer is going to be we're not going to see this person. And that's harder to defend. We refer on even if it's a pushback, and we can stand by our actions. Doesn't prevent us from feeling the enormity if something happens. I've been there, I've felt that, but I can stand by my practice ethically.
Just a quick follow-up, Andrew. Thank you so much for that, because I mean it's if there's ever there's no such thing as binary in this circumstance, but I mean that's a nice explanation that gives me some comfort. I just think about the implications of this topic we're having right now on, if you look at what we're accountable for, never overstepping our bounds, don't come into a space that we're not competent to serve in. This is one. The one we're talking about now is one that I think is at the high risk of trying to step over the line, particularly within the context of what we're talking about. I'm an executive coach. I'm not trained to be a counselor for somebody who's thinking of ending their life. So there's a very clear line. But if I'm sitting with somebody now, knowing and thinking, oh my God, there's this pressure on the system, and it's not right or wrong, just another interesting implication of what I'm going to need to decide in the moment the next time this comes up for me. Don't overstep your bound. Don't overstep your competency. Know the system. What's the choice you're going to make within that? And I think what you just described is quite useful. But the human in me, I don't know how I'm going to negotiate that the next time I'm sitting in front of somebody who I have to make that choice. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm going to pick that up because unfortunately, I'm so sorry, Kerry, Pat and Marie, we are going to close, but I want to just for everybody here might have come because you're supervisors, because that's what we listed this as. Imagine Ron is your supervisee, because this is what your supervisee is going to bring. They're going to bring the excruciating pain of having been chosen as the person to listen to this particular piece of information by a coachee, perhaps a senior leader. Somebody completely unexpected has decided to tell the coach, and the coach is going to bring some of what Ron has been articulating into supervision. And unfortunately, Andrew and I were just saying we could talk about this all day, but unfortunately we only have 3 more minutes left. And so in these 3 minutes, we have to hand over to Nicola. And I had to say something, which can't remember what I had to say now, but somebody will remember. But let's hand over to Nicola and you'll invite us in.
Oh, no, Joe and Andrew, thank you. I think that looking at the richness of the conversation in the chat and also the conversation that we've had verbally as well, not only shows to me the importance of this, but also then the further questions that we all have. And just, scratching the surface of this particular really, really important topic opens up more and more questions that we really, really want to explore. So, I mean, I've got 2 things. First thing is I know that Joe and Andrew are running sessions on this. I put a link in the chat to where you can have a look at that in a little bit more detail, and you can register for those. But with all the questions that are arising as well, I mean, Joe and Andrew, what are you yourselves taking from this conversation, and how will this change you going forward? What have you learned today? I've learned that that coaching and supervision
has a massively important role to play here. And I think Ron's question and pushback is a really important one. And I think that relatively new to the world of coaching, I'm really struck by the wisdom that sits in this world and the capability and knowledge that sits in this world in terms of supporting people who will bring a diverse range of problems and challenges. And I've also learned that it's really hard to do this in 75 minutes. And there's so much more that could be said.
Definitely. How about you, Jo?
More than learning, but reinforced. Keep talking and listening to a range of voices on this subject, but most importantly, your own inner voices. And I also want to say, because we've opened this in this 75 minutes, just know that this is going to be with you a little bit. You're going to carry it after this session. So consider how you can close the conversation for yourself in whatever way you might do that at times. Because as in, you might have a different way of describing this, but I would say that this can be sticky. It can sit with us for a while and disturb us and stay around. And so take it to your own supervision. Find a way to breathe in and finish this conversation for yourself until you choose to pick it up again. But do come to our workshops if that might be the next time that you choose to pick it up.
I mean, that
So it's been a pleasure, Andrew, to explore a bit more between us. And thanks, Nicola, for inviting us.
Oh, no, I'm super, super happy to host you for this. And in looking after yourself as well, thank you for putting these resources together. I've put a link to where the QR codes go to in this chat. I see Shirley on my screen as well. Shirley works with Jo ever so closely, and thank you for putting this together as well. This is a QR if you want to just swipe it. Then there's some lists of just helplines and further support that you might be able to access there as well for yourselves. I can see Kerry taking a picture of that as we speak. Yep, thumbs up for that one. Marvellous. But thank you, everybody. Oh, I can see Suresh as well. We can welcome Suresh. It's his first GPS dialogue as well. Nice to see you. Just while I have you as well, if we are running the EMCC Global Provider Summit itself in November. It's a week-long series of sessions for open topics in a similar way as this one has been open, not about this particular topic, but a wide variety of topics. And that's taking place on the 13th to 17th of November. Now, the website for that, where you can book your complimentary ticket, is emccglobalgps.org. And I'll put that into the chat as well. I would love to see you there, odokogps.org. It's free to attend. Great opportunity to meet other people, to see how other provide education and learning providers work and the kind of things which they're offering and what peers are talking about. Really good opportunity for your CPD as well. So do come along to that. It would be lovely to have you.